I found my daughter sleeping on a cardboard box in the freezing Chicago winter, wrapped in a dirty red scarf I had knitted for her 5 years ago. She did not recognize me. She screamed when I touched her shoulder, begging me not to hurt her. 3 hours later in the emergency room, I learned that her husband Patrick had sold their home, forged her signature, divorced her in secret, and thrown her onto the streets to marry his mistress. He thought I was just a senile old man driving a rusted Ford F-150 living on a pension check. He thought I was powerless. He was wrong. The next morning, I drove to his new luxury apartment building. When he opened the door and laughed in my face, he had no idea that I wasn't there to beg. I was there to evict him because I owned the building. My name is Bernard Kowalski, and this is how I destroyed the man who broke my daughter. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far my story of justice has traveled. It was a Tuesday in late December, the kind of Chicago day where the wind doesn't just blow, it bites through your skin and settles in your bones. I was driving my 2005 Ford F-150 down the I-90, the heater rattling like a dying man's chest, trying to pump out enough warmth to keep the windshield from icing over. I was heading to the hardware store for some plywood. My porch steps were rotting, and at 72 years old, fixing them was just another item on a list of chores that kept me busy, kept me from thinking too much about the silence in my house since my wife passed. Traffic came to a standstill under the Cicero Avenue overpass. It was gridlock, a sea of red brake lights reflecting off the dirty slush on the road. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, my knuckles swollen with arthritis, watching the steam rise from the exhaust of the car in front of me. I looked to my right towards the concrete embankment under the bridge. It was a tent city, a grim collection of blue tarps and wet cardboard boxes where the city's forgotten souls tried to survive the winter. My eyes drifted over the scene with a detached sadness. You see it every day in this city. You learn to look without seeing. But then a flash of color caught my eye, a bright, deep crimson red. It was a scarf wrapped tightly around the head of a figure huddled inside a refrigerator box. The wind whipped the end of the scarf, and my heart hammered a strange, syncopated rhythm against my ribs. I knew that scarf. I knew the yarn. Merino wool imported from Italy. I knew the stitching pattern because my wife had taught me how to do it. I had spent 3 weeks knitting that scarf for my daughter Bethany for her 33rd birthday. It was a joke between us that her big, rough-handed father could knit something so delicate. She had laughed and wrapped it around her neck, promising never to take it off. But Bethany was supposed to be in Oak Park. She was supposed to be living in the 4-bedroom colonial house I had helped them put a down payment on 10 years ago. She was supposed to be warm. She was supposed to be safe with her husband Patrick. I told myself I was crazy. It was just a red scarf. Thousands of red scarves existed in the world. But the traffic wasn't moving, and the feeling in my gut was turning from uneasiness to nausea. I put the truck in park, ignored the honking horns behind me, and opened the door. The cold hit me instantly, stealing the breath from my lungs. I climbed over the guardrail, my boots slipping on the icy concrete, and slid down the embankment toward the shadows under the bridge. The smell hit me first, urine, unwashed bodies, and the acrid smoke of a trash fire. The figure in the box didn't move as I approached. They were curled into a fetal ball, shivering so violently the cardboard vibrated against the pavement. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice rough from the cold. The figure flinched, pulling the red scarf tighter across their face. I reached out my hand, trembling, and gently pulled the wool away. The face that looked back at me was skeletal. The skin was gray and papery, stretched tight over cheekbones that protruded like blades. There was a dark purple bruise blooming across the left eye, swelling the lid shut. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, but the eyes, the one eye that could open, was a terrified, watery blue. My mother's eyes, my wife's eyes. "Bethany," I whispered. The word felt like broken glass in my throat. She recoiled, scrambling backward into the filth of the box, throwing her hands up to protect her face. "No, no, please," she rasped, her voice a dry croak. "I didn't do anything. I don't have any money. Please, Patrick, don't hit me again." She thought I was her husband. She thought I was there to beat her. "It's me, baby. It's Dad. It's Bernie," I said, tears freezing on my cheeks. I lunged forward and grabbed her before she could scramble into the traffic. She was light, terrifyingly light. It felt like I was holding a bundle of dry sticks wrapped in rags. She fought me for a second, a weak, desperate struggle, and then she collapsed against my chest, sobbing a soundless, heaving cry that tore my soul in half. I carried her up the embankment. I didn't care about my bad back. I didn't care about the angry drivers screaming at me to move my truck. I placed her in the passenger seat, cranked the heater to the maximum, and wrapped my heavy canvas jacket around her. She smelled of the street, but underneath that I could still smell the faint trace of the vanilla shampoo she had used since she was 16. I drove like a madman to Mercy Hospital. I didn't call the police. The police write reports. They file paperwork. They follow procedures. I needed something faster. I needed answers. And then I needed retribution. In the emergency room, the doctors worked on her for 2 hours while I paced the waiting room staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. A nurse came out, her face grim. "Mr. Kowalski," she said softly. "She has severe pneumonia. She is malnourished. She weighs 90 lb, and we found evidence of multiple healed fractures in her ribs and wrist. She's safe," I said, not asking. It was a statement. "She is stable," the nurse corrected. "But she is terrified. She keeps asking if he is here." I went into the room. Bethany was hooked up to IVs, the warmth of the room bringing a flush to her gray skin. When she saw me, she tried to sit up, panic flaring in her eyes again. "Did you tell him?" She whispered frantically. "Dad, did you tell Patrick?" "If he knows I called you, he said he'd kill you. He said he'd give you a heart attack." I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Her fingers were rough, the nails broken and dirty. I looked at her ring finger. The diamond wedding band was gone. The gold band was gone. Even the pale skin where the rings used to be was chafed and raw. "Patrick isn't here," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. The voice I used to use in boardrooms when I was firing executives who thought they could embezzle from my company. "Tell me what happened, Bethany. Start from the beginning." She shook, tears leaking from her eyes. "He sold the house, Dad. 6 months ago. He came home one day and said the market was crashing, that we were underwater, that we had to sell immediately to avoid bankruptcy." I frowned. The market in Oak Park wasn't crashing. It was booming. Property values had risen 12% in the last year. I checked the market trends every morning with my coffee. It was a habit from my old life. "He brought papers." She continued, her voice gaining a little strength, fueled by the trauma. "He said they were refinancing documents. He said I just needed to sign so we could save our credit. I trusted him. He's a stockbroker. He knows these things." I closed my eyes. Fraudulent conveyance trickery and the execution. I knew the legal terms. I had destroyed men for less. 2 weeks later, new owners showed up with a deed. They gave us 24 hours to vacate. Patrick told me we were renting a temporary luxury apartment downtown while he sorted out the investments. He took me to a motel instead. He left me there, Dad. He said he had to go to a business meeting in New York. She stopped, gasping for air, the monitors beeping faster. A week later, the motel kicked me out. The credit card he left me was declined. I tried to call him. His number was disconnected. I went to the bank. The joint account was empty, closed. I tried to go to the police, but they said we were divorced. Divorced? I asked, the rage turning into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. He filed for divorce. 4 months ago, she sobbed. He claimed he couldn't find me. He used a service to publish the notice in some tiny newspaper nobody reads. He got a default judgment. He took everything. The judge gave him the house proceeds because he claimed I had abandoned the marriage and taken the assets. He lied to the court dad. He erased me. Sewer service. That was the street name for it. You claim you can't serve the spouse. You publish a notice in an obscure legal journal, and when they don't show up to court because they don't know there is a hearing, you win by default. It was dirty. It was illegal. And it was effective. And then she whispered the shame coloring her voice. I saw him. 2 weeks ago, I was begging on Michigan Avenue. I saw him walking out of a jewelry store. He was with her. Monica, that girl from his office, the one he said was just an intern. She was wearing a fur coat, and she was wearing Mom's ring. The air left the room. My wife's ring, a 3-carat vintage emerald, cut diamond set in platinum. It wasn't just jewelry. It was the last thing my wife had given Bethany before she died. It was supposed to be a safety net, an heirloom. He saw me, Bethany said. He laughed. He threw a quarter at me and told Monica not to look at the trash. He told me if I ever tried to contact you, he'd finish the job. He said, "You were just a useless old man who couldn't protect anyone." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy parking lot. My reflection in the glass was an old man. Gray hair wrinkles a flannel shirt. A posture slightly stooped from years of carrying burdens. Patrick saw that old man. He saw a retired warehouse manager, a nobody who drove a truck and fixed his own plumbing. He didn't know who I really was. He didn't know that for 30 years I was the CFO of Titan Logistics, a company that moved freight across 40 states. He didn't know that my job wasn't just counting beans, it was hunting wolves. I spent 3 decades finding shell companies exposing kickbacks and destroying executives who thought they were smarter than the system. I retired quietly. I drove a truck because I liked it. I lived simply because I hated the pretension of wealth. But I didn't leave the game because I was weak. I left because I had won. I pulled my old flip phone from my pocket. It was a burner technically untraceable. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Leonard," I said when the line clicked open. "Bernie." The voice on the other end was rough. "Surprised? I thought you were growing tomatoes." I said, but winter came early. Activate Protocol B7. I need liquidity, and I need a dossier on Patrick Sterling. I want to know where he sleeps, where he eats, and who holds his debt. There was a pause. B7 Bernie. That's the nuclear option that unlocks the offshore holdings. Are you sure Patrick sold my house? He beat my daughter. He stole my wife's ring. I want to buy his debt. I want to buy his building. I want to own the air he breathes. "Consider it done," Leonard said. "Welcome back, boss." I hung up and turned back to my daughter. She was asleep. Exhaustion finally claiming her. I walked over and gently brushed a strand of dirty hair from her forehead. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the consequence of Patrick's actions. I signed the discharge papers against medical advice the next morning. The hospital was safe, but it wasn't a fortress. I needed her where I could watch the doors. I wrapped her in my heavy coat and walked her out to the truck. The cold air was sharp cleansing. We drove in silence to my cabin in the woods, 30 mi outside the city limits. It wasn't a mansion. It was a simple, sturdy log home with a wood-burning stove and a security system that cost more than the truck I drove. When we pulled into the driveway, Bethany started to cry again. "I'm sorry, Dad." She wept. "Look at me. I'm a failure. I lost everything you gave me. I'm 38 years old and I'm homeless. I'm disgusting. I stopped the truck." I turned to her, my face hard. "You are not a failure, Bethany. You are a victim of a crime. If a man mugs you in an alley, are you a failure? No. You survive." "But I was so stupid." She wailed. "I signed the papers. You trusted your husband." I said that is not a sin. His betrayal is his sin, and he is going to pay for it. I helped her inside. I drew a hot bath, adding the Epsom salts I used for my knees. I laid out my oversized flannel pajamas and a pair of thick wool socks. I went into the kitchen and started making soup, the rhythmic chopping of carrots and celery calming the violence in my blood. When she came out of the bathroom, she looked like a ghost, but a clean ghost. We ate in silence. I watched her hands shake as she held the spoon. I saw the flinch every time a log popped in the fireplace. "Go to sleep, Bethany," I said, pointing to her old bedroom, which I had kept exactly as it was when she was in high school. "You are safe here. No one gets past that gate unless I let them in." She went to bed. I sat in my armchair by the fire, the flames reflecting in the glass of whiskey I didn't drink. I opened the file Leonard had already emailed to my secure tablet. Patrick was living in the Pinnacle Apartment 409, the penthouse. Rent was $12,000 a month. He had signed a lease 6 months ago. He was listed as the owner of a new restaurant venture called Velvet, financed by a high-interest business loan that was secured by his personal assets. I scrolled down to the property ownership records of the Pinnacle. It was owned by a holding company called BK Holdings, LLC. A smile devoid of any humor touched my lips. BK Bernard Kowalski. I had bought that building 15 years ago as a diversified asset to protect my pension. I'd never visited it. I let a management company run it. I was a silent partner, a ghost on the ledger. Patrick was paying rent to me. He was sleeping in my building. He was using the money he stole from my daughter to pay me for the privilege of looking down on the city. I looked at the clock. It was 4:00 a.m. I stood up and walked to the closet in the hallway. I pushed aside the winter coats and opened the heavy steel safe bolted to the floor. Inside, next to my old service revolver, was a suit bag. I unzipped it. It was a bespoke charcoal gray suit tailored in London 20 years ago. It still fit. I checked the pockets, a silk handkerchief, a pair of gold cufflinks, and a black American Express Centurion card that hadn't seen the light of day since my retirement party. I wasn't going to the hardware store tomorrow. I was going to the Pinnacle. I slept for 2 hours sitting up in the chair, the tablet on my lap. When the sun rose, bleeding a pale, bruised light through the trees, I stood up. I washed my face with cold water. I shaved the white stubble from my chin. I dressed in my work clothes, not the suit, not yet. The suit was for the finale. Today I needed to be the old man. I needed to be the victim he expected. I left a note for Bethany gone to handle some business. Locked the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. I climbed into my truck and drove toward the city. The skyline of Chicago rose up like a jagged row of teeth against the gray sky. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Patrick was waking up next to his mistress, drinking coffee made from beans that cost more than my weekly grocery bill, thinking he had won. He thought he had discarded his wife like a piece of trash. He thought her father was a senile, helpless old fool. I pulled up to the curb in front of the Pinnacle. The valet looked at my rusted truck with open disdain, waving his hand for me to move along. I ignored him. I parked in the loading zone, put on my hazard lights, and stepped out. I didn't look like the owner of the building. I looked like a man who was lost. I shuffled toward the revolving doors, my head down, playing the part. It was time to pay my son-in-law a visit. It was time to see the luxury he had bought with my daughter's life. And it was time to give him $50 he would never forget. The lobby of the Pinnacle smelled like money and ozone. It was a scent I knew well from my days in the corporate towers of downtown Chicago, a mixture of polished marble, expensive HVAC filters, and the faint metallic tang of exclusion. I walked past the concierge desk, keeping my head down, the bill of my stained baseball cap pulled low. The young man in the crisp uniform was too busy flirting with a delivery girl to notice a frantic old man slipping into the elevator bank behind a tenant carrying a yoga mat. I belonged in the service elevator, or better yet, the alley, according to the looks I received from the woman in the yoga pants. As the door slid shut, she pressed the button for the gym. I pressed the button for the penthouse. The ride up was smooth, silent, and fast. My stomach dropped not from the speed, but from the burning bile of anticipation. I was ascending 400 ft into the sky to face the man who had buried my daughter alive. I checked my reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator. I looked pathetic. My flannel shirt was frayed at the cuffs. My jeans were stained with oil from the truck, and my face was covered in gray stubble. I looked exactly like what Patrick thought I was: a relic, a nuisance, a man who could be discarded. The doors opened onto a private foyer. There was only one door. Apartment 409. I didn't knock. I leaned on the doorbell and held it there, listening to the shrill electronic chime ring out inside. I wanted to annoy him. I wanted to drag him out of his comfort. It took a full minute before the heavy oak door swung open. Patrick stood there. He was wearing a silk robe that shimmered under the recessed lighting, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. He looked healthy. He looked rested. His skin was flush with the heat of a warm home and a full belly. The contrast between him and the skeleton I had pulled from the cardboard box under the bridge made my vision blur with red fury. Patrick looked down at me, his lip curling in a sneer that seemed practiced effortless. "Well, if it isn't the ghost of Christmas past," he drawled, taking a sip of his drink. "I thought I smelled compost." "What are you doing here, Bernie? Did you get lost on the way to the soup kitchen?" I forced my hands to stay at my sides. I wanted to wrap them around his throat. I wanted to squeeze until the arrogance popped out of his eyes. But I needed to play the game. I needed him to incriminate himself. I needed him to think he had won so completely that he wouldn't see the blade coming until it was buried in his chest. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice trembling. I made sure to sound weak, pitiful. "Where is my daughter, Patrick?" "I went to the house in Oak Park." "There were strangers there. They said you sold it." "Where is Bethany?" Patrick laughed. It was a dry bark of a sound. "She left, Bernie. She abandoned the marriage. She couldn't handle the lifestyle. She wanted to go find herself. I haven't seen her in months. She probably went to California. You know how flighty she is." "You are a liar," I said, letting a little bit of the grit show. "You sold the house. You forged her signature." Patrick stepped closer, looming over me. He was tall, athletic, built on hours of personal training and vanity. "Listen to me, you old fool. I rescued that house from foreclosure. I saved her credit. I did everything by the book. If she's telling you stories, it's because she's ashamed of walking out on a man like me. Now get off my doorstep before I call building security and have you thrown out like the trash you are." A woman appeared behind him. Monica. She was younger than Bethany. Smoother, harder. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater and leggings, holding a tiny dog that looked more like a fashion accessory than an animal. She looked at me with the same expression one might reserve for a cockroach scuttling across a kitchen counter. "Babe, who is this?" She asked, her voice high and nasal. "Is this the dad? The one from the woods?" Patrick nodded, not taking his eyes off me. "Yeah, this is Bernie. He came to beg." Monica laughed. It was a cruel tinkling sound. "Oh my God, he looks like he sleeps in his car." "Does he want money? Just give him something so he leaves, Patrick. The smell is going to get into the drapes." Patrick sighed an exaggerated heave of his shoulders. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a gold money clip. He peeled off a bill, not looking at it, just grabbing the first one his fingers touched. It was a $50 bill. Ulysses Srant stared back at me, stern and unforgiving. "Here," Patrick said, crumpling the bill into a ball and flicking it at me. It hit my chest and bounced off, landing on the floor between my muddy work boots. "Go buy yourself a new shirt, Bernie, or a bottle. Whatever gets you through the night, and tell your daughter that if she ever sends you here again, or if she ever tries to contact me, I will file a restraining order so fast her head will spin. I will sue you for harassment, and I will take that little shack you live in and turn it into a parking lot. Do you understand me? I looked at the crumpled money on the floor. $50. The price of my dignity, apparently. The price of my silence. I slowly bent down. My knees' heaves cracked audibly in the silence of the hallway. Patrick snorted, taking another sip of his scotch, watching the old man bow before him. To him, this was victory. He was the king in the castle, and I was the peasant scrambling for crumbs. But as I reached for the bill, my hand brushed the floor. I wasn't just reaching for the money. I was looking at the wood. It was a rich, dark hardwood laid in a specific herringbone pattern. I ran my thumb over the grain. It was Brazilian walnut. I knew the texture. I knew the density. Years ago, when I was diversifying my portfolio shielding assets from the volatility of the logistics market, my lawyer Leonard had advised me to invest in residential real estate. We had formed a shell company, BK Holdings. We bought a distressed high-rise project that had run out of funding. I had personally approved the finishing budget to get the building up to code and ready for the luxury market. I remembered the argument with the contractors. They wanted to use cheap laminate. I had insisted on Brazilian walnut for the penthouse units. I had signed the purchase order myself. Batch number 704. I tilted my head, looking closely at the baseboard near the door frame, where the light hit the floor at an angle. There it was, a tiny, almost imperceptible knot in the wood, a flaw that the installer had tried to hide with varnish. I remembered walking this unit when it was just concrete and dust. I remembered standing right here deciding that this would be the jewel of the portfolio. I snatched the $50 bill and stood up. My joints achy, but my mind was crystal clear. The heat of the anger had crystallized into something colder, harder. It was the ice of absolute certainty. Patrick was standing on my floor. He was breathing my air. He was paying rent to a company that funneled directly into a blind trust with my name on it. He was using the money he had stolen from my daughter to pay me. I smoothed out the $50 bill. I folded it neatly once, twice, until Grant's face was hidden. I looked up at Patrick. He was smiling a smug, oily grin of satisfaction. He thought he had bought me off. He thought he had seen the last of me. "Thank you, Patrick," I said softly. My voice didn't shake this time. "You have been very generous." "Get out," he said, turning his back on me to walk back into the apartment. Monica slammed the heavy door in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a heavy final thud. I stood there for a moment in the silence of the hallway. I looked at the $50 in my hand. I put it in my shirt pocket right next to my heart. I wasn't going to spend it. I was going to keep it. It was evidence. It was a contract. He had paid for his own destruction, and he didn't even know it. I walked back to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the car descended, watching the floor numbers count down, I took out my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Bethany. I called Leonard. "Leonard," I said when he answered. "I just left the Pinnacle. Did you find him?" Leonard asked. "I found him." I said, "He's in the penthouse unit 409. "Okay," Leonard said. "We can start the eviction process." "It might take 30 days. The laws in Chicago are tricky." "No," I said, watching the lobby approach. "I don't want an eviction, not yet. I want you to pull the lease agreement for Unit 409. Check the clauses regarding moral turpitude and criminal activity." And Leonard, yes. Bernie checked the banking routing number he uses to pay the rent. Cross-reference it with the account number he used to deposit the proceeds from the sale of the Oak Park house. I want to trace every single dollar. I want to know if he is paying me with my own money. I stepped out of the elevator. The concierge was still flirting with the delivery girl. He didn't look up. I walked out into the cold Chicago air, the wind hitting my face. I walked to my truck, climbed in, and started the engine. It roared to life, a rough, dependable sound. I looked up at the top of the glass tower gleaming in the winter sun. Patrick was up there drinking his scotch, thinking the problem was solved. He thought he was untouchable in his tower. He didn't realize that the man he had just humiliated didn't just have the keys to the kingdom. I owned the castle, and I was about to bring the walls down on top of his head. I drove away from the pinnacle with the heater in my truck blasting, but my hands were still cold. They were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, the leather cover groaning under the pressure. That $50 bill was in my shirt pocket, burning against my chest like a brand. Patrick thought he had dismissed a beggar. He didn't know he had just handed a declaration of war to his executioner. I didn't go back to the cabin. Not yet. Bethany was safe, locked behind steel doors, with a shotgun I had taught her how to use 20 years ago. She needed sleep. I needed ammunition. I drove north, leaving the downtown grid for the winding, tree-lined streets of Lincoln Park. I pulled up to a brownstone that looked like it belonged in a history book. It was understated, solid, and expensive. It belonged to Leonard Katz. Leonard was the only man in Chicago who knew exactly how many zeros were in my bank account. He was my lawyer, my consigliere, and the only person I trusted to bury a body, metaphorically speaking. I parked my rusted Ford F-150 behind his silver Bentley. The contrast was almost comical. I walked up the stone steps and rang the bell. It was past midnight, but Leonard opened the door before the chime had finished echoing. He was wearing a silk dressing gown and holding a tablet, his silver hair uncombed, but his eyes sharp as flint. He looked at my muddy boots, my stained flannel shirt, and the grease under my fingernails. He didn't blink. He didn't ask why I looked like I had just crawled out of a storm drain. He just stepped back and held the door open. "Come in, boss," he said. "The coffee is already brewing." I walked into his study. It was a room that smelled of old paper and expensive tobacco. I sank into a leather armchair that cost more than my first car. Leonard sat behind his massive mahogany desk and turned a large monitor toward me. "I pulled the dossier you asked for." Leonard said, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "Protocol B7 is active. We have full liquidity. But Bernie, you need to see this." "You were right about the house, but it's worse than we thought." "Show me," I said, leaning forward. Leonard brought up a spreadsheet. It was a forensic accounting of Patrick Sterling's life. It was a map of a disaster. "Here is the sale of the Oak Park house," Leonard said, pointing to a line item. "Closed 6 months ago. Net proceeds after paying off the mortgage were $850,000. Where is it?" I asked. "Is it in an offshore account? Did he hide it?" Leonard shook his head. "He didn't hide it, Bernie. He burned it." "Look at this transfer." 2 days after the closing, he wired $700,000 to a commercial construction firm, and the rest went to a lease deposit and branding consultants. I squinted at the screen. Branding consultants. "He's opening a restaurant," Leonard said. "It's called Velvet. It's in the West Loop. High-end dining, gold leaf steaks, caviar service. The kind of place where people go to take pictures of their food, not to eat it." I sat back, the absurdity of it washing over me. "He stole my daughter's home. He threw her on the street. He erased her life. And he did it to open a vanity project. He did it so he could play the big shot restaurant tour. It gets better." Leonard said, his voice dry or worse, depending on how you look at it. $700,000 doesn't open a place like Velvet in this city. You need double that for the build-out he commissioned. So he borrowed. I looked at the debt column. It was a sea of red ink. He took out a business loan for one. $2 million, Leonard explained. But because he has no track record in hospitality, the prime banks wouldn't touch him. He went to secondary lenders, predatory rates, variable interest starting at 18%. He personally guaranteed the loan is French. He put up everything he has as collateral. His car, his future earnings, his stocks. He is leveraged to the hilt. "He thinks he's going to be a millionaire," I muttered. He thinks this restaurant is going to make him a king. He is bleeding cash, Leonard corrected. He is 2 months behind on the contractor payments. He is using credit cards to pay for inventory. He is floating checks. He is technically insolvent. He is living in your penthouse, driving a leased Porsche and wearing a Rolex, but his net worth is negative. If the restaurant doesn't open next week and become an instant sensation, he is finished. I stared at the screen. I saw the weakness. I saw the throat exposed. Patrick wasn't a businessman. He was a gambler who had bet his life on a single hand of cards. And he had used my daughter as his buy-in. Who holds the note? I asked. Who holds the $1.2 million debt? A mid-tier lender called Apex Capital, Leonard said. They are aggressive. If he misses a payment, they will strip him clean. Buy it, I said. Leonard stopped typing. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Buy the debt. Buy it all. I said, my voice dropping an octave. Call Apex in the morning. Offer them full value plus 5% to take the paper off their hands quietly. Use the shell company. Use BK Holdings. I want to own his debt. I want to be the one who decides when to call it in. Leonard smiled. It was a shark's smile. You want to be his landlord and his banker. I want to own him, Leonard. I want to own the roof over his head and the ground under his feet, and I want you to look into the divorce decree. Bethany said he claimed abandonment. Leonard pulled up another document. This one was a court filing. I already did. It's Dirty Bernie. He filed an affidavit of diligent search. He claimed he hired investigators to find her. He claimed she emptied the accounts and fled the state. He committed perjury. He lied to a judge. Can we prove it? We can prove she was in a motel 3 miles away paid for by his credit card on the dates he claimed she was missing. Leonard said we can prove he knew exactly where she was because we have the credit card statements showing he paid for the room for 1 week before cutting her off. This isn't just grounds for overturning the divorce. This is a felony. Good. I said, keep that in the chamber. That's for the police. The debt is for me. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the dark street. My reflection in the glass looked like a tired old man in dirty clothes, but inside the engine was revving. The machine that had built Titan Logistics was waking up. Leonard stood up too. He walked over to a sidebar and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He didn't offer me the cheap stuff. He poured the 30-year-old single malt he saved for closing deals. He handed me the glass. You know, boss, he said quietly, you've been retired for 5 years. I haven't seen this look in your eyes since we did the hostel on takeover of Redline Freight. They hurt my little girl Leonard, I said, taking the glass. Redline Freight was business. This is an execution. Leonard clinked his glass against mine. To velvet, he said. To velvet, or, I replied, may be a spectacular failure. I didn't drink the scotch. I set it down on the desk. I needed a clear head. I needed to go back to the cabin and tell Bethany that the cavalry wasn't just coming. The cavalry was already here, and it had just bought the enemy's ammunition. Get the paperwork for the debt purchase ready by 900 a.m. I ordered turning to the door and find out when the grand opening of this restaurant is. I want to be there. I want to see his face when the house of cards falls. It's this Friday, Leonard said, checking the file. A gala event. Invitation only. Black tie. The mayor might be there. Get me an invitation, I said. And get one for Bethany and Leonard. Call my tailor. My old tuxedo might be a little tight in the shoulders. I need a new one. Leonard nodded. Done. Anything else? Yes, I said, pausing at the door, my hand on the brass knob. Find out who supplies his liquor. Find out who supplies his meat. I want to buy their contracts too. If he wants to serve a drink in this town, I want him to have to ask my permission first. I walked out into the night. The air was still freezing, but I didn't feel it anymore. I had a plan. I had a target. And thanks to Patrick's $50, I had all the motivation I needed. He wanted to play the big man. He wanted to live in the penthouse. He wanted to own the night. By the time I was done with him, he wouldn't even be able to afford the cardboard box. I found my daughter in. I drove back to the cabin under the cover of darkness. The road was empty, just my headlights cutting through the black. I thought about Patrick sleeping in my building, dreaming of his grand opening, dreaming of his millions. He was sleeping on a landmine, and I had just put my finger on the detonator. When I got back, Bethany was awake, sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at me, her eyes, swollen fear, still lingering in the corners of her mouth. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice small. "I went to the bank." I lied smoothly. "I went to get some things sorted." She looked at my dirty boots. "Did you see him?" she asked. "Did you go to him?" I sat down next to her and took her hand. Her skin was starting to feel warmer. The color was coming back to her cheeks. "I saw him, Bethany." She flinched. "What did he do?" "Did he hurt you?" "He gave me $50, I said." She looked confused. $50, why?" "Because he thinks I'm a beggar," I said. "He thinks I'm nobody." "He's a monster, Dad," she whispered. "You can't fight him. He has lawyers. He has money." I squeezed her hand. I looked into her eyes, the same blue eyes her mother had. "He has debt, Bethany. He has lies. And as of tonight, he has a partner he doesn't know about." I stood up and put a log on the fire. Sparks flew up the chimney. "Go to sleep, honey," I said. "We have a big week ahead of us. We have a party to go to on Friday." "A party?" she asked. "Yes," I said, watching the flames consume the wood. "We are going to the opening of a restaurant called Velvet. And you are going to wear your mother's diamond necklace. The one I kept in the safety deposit box. The one he didn't get." "But why?" she asked. "Because," I said, turning to face her, the firelight casting long shadows across the room. "We are going to remind Patrick Sterling that when you sell a house that doesn't belong to you, eventually the owner comes home. And he is going to learn that eviction notices don't always come in the mail. Sometimes they walk through the front door wearing a tuxedo." The black sedan was parked just beyond the tree line at the edge of my property, tucked partially behind a thicket of bare oaks. To the untrained eye, it was just a car pulled over, perhaps a driver checking his GPS or making a call. But I didn't have an untrained eye. I had spent 30 years in logistics, managing fleets, securing warehouses, and dealing with corporate espionage. I knew a stakeout when I saw one. It was a nondescript Ford Taurus, the kind of vehicle that blends into the pavement. The preferred chariot of private investigators who charge by the hour to ruin lives. I stood at my kitchen window sipping black coffee, watching the exhaust puff rhythmically from the Taurus's tailpipe in the frigid morning air. Patrick wasn't just relying on my poverty to keep me quiet, he was active, he was building a case. He knew that if Bethany surfaced with a coherent story about forgery and fraud, his house of cards would collapse. He needed a preemptive strike. He needed her to be unreliable. He needed her to be insane. If he could prove she was mentally unstable, her claims about the house would be dismissed as the ramblings of a sick woman. He could claim he sold the house to pay for her care. He could claim the divorce was a mercy to protect his assets from her manic spending. He was looking for ammo to have her committed to lock her away in a state facility where her voice would be silenced by sedatives and thick walls. I turned to Bethany. She was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, looking stronger than she had 2 days ago, but still fragile. "He's watching us," I said quietly. "There is a man in a car down the road." "Patrick sent him." Panic flared in her eyes. She started to stand up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Is he coming in? Do we need to hide?" "Sit down," I ordered gently. "He isn't coming in. He's fishing. He wants to see a crazy woman. He wants to see a senile father who can't control her. If we give him nothing, he stays. If we give him what he wants, he reports back to Patrick that the coast is clear, and Patrick gets sloppy. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I want you to stay away from the windows," I said. "I'm going to go out there. I'm going to give him a show." I put on my old canvas coat and grabbed a broom. I walked out onto the porch, leaving the front door wide open, despite the freezing temperatures. I stepped into the yard and started sweeping the snow off the walkway, but I did it erratically. I swept the same spot over and over. I stopped and yelled at a squirrel. I talked to the air, gesturing wildly with my hands, acting out a conversation with a ghost. Then I pulled out my burner phone and held it to my ear. I knew the windows of the Taurus were rolled up, but I also knew he likely had a parabolic microphone pointed right at me. "I don't know what to do with her, doctor," I shouted at the empty air, pitching my voice to Carrie. "She's seeing things again. She thinks the house is burning down. She doesn't recognize me. Yes, I'm trying to keep her calm, but I'm old. I can't handle this much longer. Maybe you're right. Maybe a home is the best place for her." I slumped my shoulders, acting the part of the defeated, overwhelmed old man. I walked back inside, slamming the door hard enough to shake the frame. I went back to the window and watched. 5 minutes later, the Taurus started up and pulled away, crunching slowly down the gravel road. The spy had his pay dirt. He would tell Patrick that Bethany was losing her mind and that her father was ready to give up. Patrick would feel safe. He would think the threat was neutralizing itself. And while he was celebrating his victory over a ghost and a mad woman, I was going to cut his legs off. I changed into my work clothes, clean jeans, a pressed shirt, and a heavy wool coat. I couldn't wear the tuxedo yet. That was for the grand finale. I told Bethany to lock the doors and not open them for anyone, not even the police, until I returned. I drove the truck into the city, but this time I didn't go to his apartment. I went to the financial district. I parked in a garage 3 blocks away from the glass and steel tower that housed the headquarters of Apex Capital. Leonard met me in the lobby. He looked impeccable, in a navy pinstriped suit, holding a leather briefcase that cost more than the furniture in my cabin. He didn't blink at my rough appearance. He knew that in this meeting, I wasn't the beggar. I was the bank. "We have the appointment," Leonard said as we rode the elevator to the 45th floor. "The vice president of distressed assets is expecting a representative from a private equity firm. He doesn't know it's you. He just knows we want to buy the paper." "Who is the debtor?" I asked just to hear it. "Patrick Sterling, doing business as Velvet LLC," Leonard recited. $1.2 million in principal. Interest accruing daily. The loan is classified as high risk. Patrick has missed the last 2 interest-only payments. He's technically in default, but Apex hasn't moved to foreclose yet because they think the restaurant opening might generate cash. "They are nervous, Bernie. They want out." "Good," I said. "Let's help them exit." We walked into a conference room that smelled of furniture polish and fear. A young executive with slicked back hair and a tie that was too wide sat at the head of the table. He looked at Leonard. Then he looked at me. His eyes lingered on my calloused hands and the windburn on my face. He clearly thought I was the driver, or maybe an eccentric uncle Leonard was babysitting. "Mr. Katz," the executive said, standing up to shake Leonard's hand. "And this is the investor," Leonard said smoothly, gesturing to a chair. "He prefers to remain anonymous. We can refer to him as Mr. K." The executive smirked, a tiny dismissive twitch of his lips. "Of course, Mr. K. Well, gentlemen, you expressed interest in acquiring the Sterling note. As I mentioned on the phone, the underlying asset, the restaurant, is poised for a significant launch. We feel the valuation is solid." "Cut the crap, son," I said. My voice was a low rumble, the voice that used to make warehouse foremen sweat. I didn't sit down. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. You aren't selling a restaurant. You are selling a bad debt. The borrower is 2 months behind. He's leveraged his personal assets, which consist of a leased car and a condo he doesn't own. You're holding a bag of rocks and you're looking for a swimmer to hand it to. The executive stiffened. He looked at Leonard, confused by the aggression coming from the man in the work boots. My client has done his due diligence, Leonard said, opening his briefcase. We know the loan is toxic. We are offering to take it off your books today. Immediate wire transfer. No contingencies. The executive narrowed his eyes. Why, if it's toxic, why do you want it? Because my client specializes in high-risk recovery, Leonard lied. We have methods of extracting value that a regulated bank like Apex cannot employ. The executive hesitated. He was greedy, but he was also risk-averse. He wanted the bad number off his quarterly report. Face value. The executive said $1.2 million plus accrued interest and a 5% early exit fee. I turned from the window. I walked to the table and placed my hands on the mahogany surface. I leaned in close to the young man. Done, I said. He blinked. He expected a negotiation. He expected me to haggle over the percentage points. He didn't know that I would have paid double just for the pleasure of holding the leash around Patrick's neck. Leonard slid a document across the table. It was a purchase agreement. The assignee was listed as Archangel Holdings, another shell company I had set up years ago for hostile takeovers. The name felt appropriate. The executive read through it quickly, his greed overcoming his confusion. He signed. Leonard signed. Now the funds, the executive said, tapping his pen. We need verification of funds before we release the lien. I reached into my coat pocket. I didn't pull out a wire transfer receipt. I pulled out a checkbook. It wasn't the personal checkbook for my pension account. It was a business ledger bound in black leather. I opened it. I took a heavy fountain pen from my pocket. I wrote the date. I wrote the name Apex Capital. I wrote the amount $2 million. I added a significant premium just to speed up the clearing process and to cover the administrative costs of ruining a man's life. I signed my name at the bottom. Bernard Kowalski. I ripped the check out of the book with a sharp tearing sound. I slid it across the table. The executive picked it up. He looked at the number. $2 million. He looked at my face. He looked at my clothes. He laughed a nervous, incredulous sound. Sir, with all due respect, I can't just take a personal check for $2 million from... He glanced at the signature from a Mr. Kowalski. I need to verify this. Call the number on the back, I said. It's the private wealth division of Chase. Ask for Mr. Henderson. Tell him Bernie is buying a toy. The executive hesitated, then picked up the conference phone. He dialed. He waited. His face went pale. Yes, Mr. Henderson. He stammered into the receiver. I have a check here. Yes. Serial number 0094. Yes. Authorized. He listened for a moment longer, his eyes widening as he looked at me. He hung up the phone slowly. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't disdain anymore. It was fear. It was the realization that he was in the presence of a predator he hadn't recognized. The funds are verified, he whispered. Good, I said. Transfer the title of the debt to Archangel Holdings immediately. I want the physical note in my lawyer's hands by the end of the business day. I turned to leave. Leonard was already packing up his briefcase, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. Mr. Kowalski, the executive, called out as I reached the door. If you don't mind me asking, what business were you in? I stopped. I didn't look back. Pest control, I said. I walked out of the building and into the cold air. I felt lighter. I felt stronger. I technically owned Patrick Sterling now. Every plate of food he served, every bottle of wine he opened, every breath he took in that restaurant belonged to me. He was going to have his grand opening. He was going to put on his tuxedo and play the big shot, and I was going to be there to pull the rug out from under him. I got back in my truck. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the private investigator Leonard had hired to tail the guy watching Patrick's PI. Target bought the bait, the text read. He called the client reporting that the father is senile and the daughter is catatonic. Client is celebrating at the bar. I smiled. Patrick was celebrating. He thought I was incompetent. He thought he was safe. He had no idea that I had just signed a piece of paper that turned his American dream into a foreclosure notice. I drove home to the cabin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow. I thought about the $2 million I had just spent. I hadn't even checked my account balance before writing the check. I didn't need to. I knew what I had. For 40 years, I had built a fortress of wealth, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, hiding it behind a facade of modesty because I wanted to live a real life. I wanted to know who my friends were. I wanted to know if my family loved me for me. Well, now I knew. And now the money wasn't a secret anymore. It was a weapon. And I had just loaded the chamber. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind off Lake Michigan was still sharp enough to cut glass. It whipped down Randolph Street, stinging the faces of the socialites and minor celebrities lined up outside the velvet ropes of Patrick's restaurant. The neon sign above the door buzzed with a pretentious, electric blue hum velvet. It looked like a nightclub for people who hated food, sleek, dark, and utterly soulless. I watched from the back seat of a black town car parked across the street. I wasn't driving the F-150 tonight. Tonight required armor. I adjusted the cuffs of my tuxedo. It was midnight blue bespoke, cut to hide the slight stoop in my shoulders and accentuate the breadth of my chest. It was the uniform of power, a language men like Patrick claimed to speak but never truly understood. Beside me, Bethany was trembling, but not from the cold. She was wearing a floor-length gown of crimson silk that I had bought for her mother 20 years ago for a charity gala. It fit her perfectly, draping over her thin frame like liquid fire. Around her neck, resting against her pale skin, was the necklace the Kowalski diamonds, a cascading river of platinum and ice that caught the streetlights and threw them back with a vengeance. Patrick thought he had stripped her clean. He thought he had sold every piece of value she owned. He didn't know that the jewelry box he had raided in their bedroom contained high-quality replicas I had commissioned years ago for insurance purposes. He had pawned glass and cubic zirconia for pennies on the dollar, thinking he was a thief. The real stones, the ones that carried the history of my family's ascent from the loading docks to the boardroom, had been sitting in a safety deposit box at Chase Private Client for a decade. "Are you ready?" I asked, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. "He's going to make a scene, Dad," she whispered. "He's going to humiliate us." "He can try," I said. "But tonight the script has changed. Tonight, we aren't the audience. We are the critics." The driver opened the door. I stepped out onto the pavement, the polished leather of my dress shoes clicking against the frost. I offered my arm to Bethany. She took it, lifting her chin. In that moment, the broken woman from under the bridge vanished. In her place stood the daughter of Bernard Kowalski. We crossed the street. The bouncers at the door were huge men in tight black suits, holding clipboards like shields. They looked at the line of people waiting to get in. Then they looked at us. They didn't check a list. They didn't ask for ID. They saw the cut of my suit and the fire around my daughter's neck, and they instinctively stepped aside, unhooking the velvet rope. Money recognizes money. We walked into the foyer. It was a cavern of polished concrete and gold leaf filled with the roar of conversation and the clinking of crystal. A jazz band was playing in the corner, drowning out the reality of the debts piling up in the back office. Patrick was standing in the center of the room, holding court. He was wearing a white dinner jacket, looking like a caricature of a Gatsby villain. Monica was clinging to his arm, draped in a silver dress that showed too much skin and not enough class. She was laughing too loudly at a joke made by a city alderman. Then Patrick turned. His eyes swept over the room, soaking in the adulation until they landed on us. His smile died instantly. It didn't fade. It vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He blinked as if trying to clear a hallucination. He saw the old man from the hallway, but he didn't see the rags. He saw the tuxedo. He saw Bethany. He excused himself from the alderman and marched toward us, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Monica trailed behind him, her eyes narrowing as she focused on Bethany. "What the hell is this?" Patrick hissed, stopping 2 feet away from us. He kept his voice low, trying not to alert the guests, but the venom was palpable. "Who let you in?" "I told you to stay away from me. I told you I would call the police." "Good evening, Patrick," I said. My voice was calm, resonant. It carried over the jazz music. "The restaurant looks expensive. I hope the food lives up to the decor." "Get out," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get out right now before I have you thrown into the gutter where you belong." "You think because you rented a tux you can crash my opening? You're pathetic. And you—" He turned his glare on Bethany. "You look ridiculous." "Who did you steal that dress from?" Monica gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Bethy's neck. "Patrick," she squeaked. "Look." Patrick looked. He stared at the necklace. He frowned. "I sold that," he muttered, confusion wearing with rage. "I sold that 6 months ago to a fence in Chinatown. I got $2,000 for it." "You sold a lie, Patrick," I said coldly. "Just like you sold this restaurant to your investors. That is the real necklace. It's worth more than the lease on this building, and it looks much better on my daughter than it ever would have on your mistress." Monica's face twisted in fury. "You take that off," she shrieked, forgetting the crowd, forgetting the facade. "That's mine. He gave it to me. He gave you glass, my dear," I said. That was enough. Patrick snapped. He waved frantically at the head of security, a burly man standing by the coat check. "Jerry, get them out now. These people are trespassing. They are harassing my guests. Throw them out the back." Jerry started to move toward us, his face set in a professional scowl. Patrick smirked, crossing his arms. He thought it was over. He thought he had the power. But Jerry didn't reach us. A hand shot out from a group of men standing near the bar and stopped the security guard in his tracks. "Hold on a minute, Jerry," a voice boomed. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was older, distinguished with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Patrick's car. It was Arthur Henderson, the director of private wealth for the largest bank in Illinois. The man who had personally verified my check 2 days ago, the man who held the keys to half the commercial debt in the city. Patrick's face went slack. He knew Henderson. He had tried to get a loan from him 6 months ago and had been laughed out of the office. Henderson was the kind of man Patrick dreamed of being. "Mr. Henderson." Patrick stammered, his aggression evaporating into sycophancy. "I'm so sorry. These people are crashers, disturbed relatives. I was just handling it." Arthur Henderson ignored Patrick completely. He walked right past him. He walked up to me. The room went silent. The guests sensed the shift in gravity. They watched as the most powerful banker in Chicago stopped in front of the old man Patrick had just called trash. Henderson bowed his head. It wasn't a nod. It was a bow of difference, a bow of respect. Mr. Kowalski Henderson said, his tone warm and admiring. "I didn't know you were coming out of retirement for this." "It is an honor to see you, sir." "Hello, Arthur," I said, shaking his hand. "It's been a while." "Too long," Chairman Henderson said. "The board still talks about your restructuring of the logistics corridor in '08. Legend stuff." He turned to Bethany. "And this must be your daughter. The resemblance is striking." Bethany managed a polite nod, though her eyes were wide with shock. She had never seen this side of her father. She only knew the dad who fixed bikes and grilled burgers. She didn't know the chairman. Patrick stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked from Henderson to me, his brain trying to compute the impossible equation in front of him. Chairman, board, legend. Mr. Henderson Patrick squeaked. You know my father-in-law. He's a warehouse worker. He drives a truck. Henderson turned to Patrick slowly, his expression cooling by 50 degrees. He looked at Patrick like he was a smudge on a window. Mr. Sterling Henderson said, his voice dripping with ice. Mr. Kowalski isn't a warehouse worker. He founded the warehouse. He built the logistics network that supplies this entire region. He is the chairman of the board for BK Holdings. Henderson paused, letting the silence stretch. He is also one of the bank's most valued clients, and if he is here, I assume it is because he has a significant interest in your little venture. Patrick looked at me. The color drained from his face until he looked like a wax figure. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning, terrible horror. He looked at the $50 I had put in my pocket yesterday. He looked at the floor he was standing on. He looked at the walls of the building. BK Holdings, he whispered. BK Bernard Kowalski. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I took a step closer to him. The security guard, Jerry, had backed away, sensing that he was on the wrong side of the food chain. I told you, Patrick, I said softly so only he could hear. I told you I was going to handle some business. The music seemed to stop. The clinking of glasses ceased. The entire room was watching the man in the white jacket shrink before the man in the blue tuxedo. Patrick looked around, desperate for an escape, desperate for someone to tell him this was a joke. But there were no jokes here. There was only the math, and the math was coming for him. You own the building, he stammered. I stepped around him, brushing his shoulder with mine. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Come on, Bethany, I said, leading her toward the main dining room. Let's get a table. I want to see if the kitchen is as messy as the finances. We walked past him, leaving him standing in the foyer, sweating in his rented dream while the sharks began to circle. He thought the night was ruined. He was wrong. The night had just begun, and I hadn't even taken the microphone yet. The jazz band had stopped playing mid-note, the saxophonist lowering his instrument as the feedback from the speakers died down, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Patrick stood frozen on the stage, his hand still reaching for the microphone I now held. He looked like a man who had stepped off a curb, expecting pavement, and found a canyon. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The microphone amplified the low, growly timbre of my voice, carrying it to every corner of the room, bouncing off the gold leaf ceilings and the crystal chandeliers. I apologized for the interruption, I said, my eyes sweeping the room, locking momentarily with the stunned faces of the city's elite. My son-in-law, Mr. Sterling, seems to be under the impression that tonight is a grand opening. It isn't. It is a foreclosure. A ripple of gasps tore through the room. Patrick lunged toward me, his face twisting from shock into a feral snarl. He's lying, he screamed, his voice cracking, desperate to drown out the PA system. He's senile. He's a crazy old man from the street. Security, get him out of here. He grabbed for the mic again, but two of my men, large, silent figures who had blended into the catering staff until this moment, stepped out from the wings of the stage. They didn't touch him. They just walled him off, crossing their arms, creating a barrier of muscle and black wool between him and me. I turned back to Patrick, keeping the microphone close to my lips so the entire room could hear the interrogation. Am I crazy, Patrick? Or am I just the only person in this room who read the fine print? You're ruined. Patrick spat, sweat beading on his forehead. I'll sue you for everything you have. I'll take that shack you live in and burn it down. You can try, I said calmly. But first you might want to check your balances. Patrick, do you recognize the name Archangel Holdings? He blinked the name, registering a flicker of confusion in his panic-stricken eyes. What? Who cares? Archangel Holdings is the private equity firm that purchased your business loan from Apex Capital at 4:00 p.m. this afternoon. I explained, enunciating every word. $1.2 million. You personally guaranteed it. You put up this restaurant, your future earnings, and your personal assets as collateral. Patrick laughed, a high, jagged sound that bordered on hysteria. So what debt is normal? Every business has debt. I'm good for it. Look at this place. We're packed. You missed your last 2 interest payments, I said. And under the terms of the high-risk note, you signed the one you didn't bother to read because you were too busy picking out Italian marble. The note holder has the right to accelerate the debt upon evidence of material fraud or insolvency. I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo and pulled out a folded document. I snapped it open. The sound was sharp like a pistol crack in the quiet room. This is a notice of acceleration, I said. Archangel Holdings is calling the loan. The full amount, $1.2 million, due immediately. Patrick stared at the paper. You can't do that. That's illegal. You can't just demand $1 million in the middle of dinner. It would be aggressive. I conceded, leaning in closer. If you hadn't committed fraudulent conveyance, the phrase hung in the air. The bankers in the back of the room stiffened. They knew those words. They knew they were the death knell of any financial future. What are you talking about? Patrick whispered, the color draining from his face. I turned to the audience. 6 months ago, this man sold a house in Oak Park. It was a home he shared with my daughter. He forged her signature on the deed. He filed a divorce claiming she couldn't be found while he had her stashed in a motel 3 miles away. He took the $850,000 from that sale's stolen money and he dumped it into this room. I pointed to the crystal chandeliers above us. He bought those lights with my daughter's safety. He bought that bar with her future. In the eyes of the law that makes this entire restaurant fruit of the poisonous tree, it is a classic fraudulent conveyance, moving illegal assets to shield them. And since I represent the victim and I own the debt, I looked Patrick dead in the eye. I am seizing the asset. I am repossessing Velvet right now. Patrick spun around looking for an ally, looking for anyone who would step in and stop the nightmare. Staff. He yelled at the waiters, standing frozen by the tables. What are you doing? Get him out. I pay your salaries. Do something. Actually, you don't, a voice said from the floor. It was Carlos, the head waiter. He stepped forward, his face calm. He looked at Patrick with a mixture of pity and disdain. You bounced our payroll checks last week, Patrick, and the week before. Patrick goggled at him. It was a bank error. I told you I'll fix it on Monday. We fixed it ourselves, Carlos said. He reached for the buttons of his velvet vest. Around the room, the movement rippled through the staff. Bartenders, servers, hostesses, 20 people in total, simultaneously unbuttoned their uniforms. They let the expensive branded vests drop to the floor. Underneath, they weren't wearing the crisp white dress shirts Patrick had mandated. They were wearing bright red t-shirts. The visual impact was visceral. It looked like a wound opening up in the middle of the black tie crowd. On the front of every shirt in bold white block letters was a single word: fraud. A collective gasp went through the room. Phones were raised high, recording the spectacle. This wasn't just a scene, it was a viral moment being born. The staff formed a silent ring around the dance floor, a red wall of accusation. This is a setup. Patrick screamed, backing away until he hit the drum kit, the cymbals crashing behind him. This is a conspiracy. You turned them against me. I didn't turn them, I said. I just paid them. I offered them a contract with BK Holdings starting tomorrow at a fair wage. They chose solvency over your empty promises. I signaled to the back of the room. The double doors swung open again. This time it wasn't guests. 6 men in gray coveralls walked in carrying power drills, tarps, and moving dollies. They wore the logo of my property management firm. They didn't speak. They moved with military precision. 2 of them went straight to the bar and began packing the top shelf liquor into crates. 2 others went to the walls and started unhooking the expensive abstract art. "What are you doing?" Patrick shrieked, running toward a worker who was taking down a painting. "That cost $10,000. Put it back. It cost my daughter's dignity," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "And now it is being liquidated to pay the interest on your loan." Patrick grabbed the worker's arm. The worker stopped and looked at him impassive. "Sir, please do not interfere with the repossession process, or we will have to restrain you." Repossession. Patrick looked around wildly. "Monica, call the police. Call someone." He looked for his wife. Monica was standing near the entrance, pressed against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Her face was a mask of horror. She clutched her clutch bag to her chest, her eyes darting between Patrick and the exit. "Monica," Patrick yelled, "help me!" She shook her head a tiny, jerky motion. She didn't move toward him. She took a step toward the door. I turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "the kitchen is closed. The bar is closed. This establishment is now under new management. Please leave your plates. The meal is on the house. Consider it an apology for the company you were forced to keep tonight." The room cleared with shocking speed. The socialites and politicians didn't want to be caught in the blast radius of a financial scandal. They grabbed their coats and hurried out, casting disgusted looks at the man in the white jacket who was now sobbing in the middle of the floor. Within minutes, the room was empty of guests. The jazz band had packed up and left. The only people remaining were my crew, the red-shirted staff, Bethany, Leonard, and Patrick. He stood amidst the ruins of his grand opening. The floor was littered with dropped napkins and the velvet vests of his former employees. The walls were bare where the art had been. He looked at me. His eyes were red, wet with tears of self-pity. Why, he whispered, his voice trembling, "Why go to this trouble? You could have just sued me. You could have just called the cops." I stepped off the stage and walked toward him. I stopped when I was close enough to see the broken veins in his eyes. "Because you made my daughter sleep in a cardboard box, Patrick," I said softly. "Because you made her feel small. You made her feel like she was nothing. So I wanted to show you what small really looks like." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were the keys to the front door of the restaurant. I had had the locks changed an hour before the party started. I dropped the keys on the floor at his feet. They clattered loudly on the polished concrete. "You're fired, Patrick." He looked down at the keys. He looked up at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was a man hollowed out. He turned to look for Monica. She was already gone. The door was swinging shut behind her. "My car," Patrick muttered, patting his pockets. "I'll leave. I'll get my car." "Your car?" I asked. "The Porsche." He nodded frantically. "Yes, I'll just go." "I don't think so," I said. "The valet gave the keys to the repo man about 10 minutes ago. It's part of the personal guarantee clause. Default on the business, lose the personal assets." Patrick stared at me. "You took my car." "I took everything, Patrick. I took the roof over your head. I took the shirt off your back. I took the ground you're standing on." I gestured to the door. "Now get out of my building before I have you arrested for trespassing." Patrick Sterling, the man who wanted to be a king, slumped. His shoulders collapsed. He turned and walked slowly toward the door, his footsteps heavy and dragging. He didn't look back. He walked out into the cold Chicago night. A man with nothing but a tuxedo he probably hadn't paid for, and a $50 bill he had thrown away. I watched him go. I felt Bethy's hand slip into mine. Her grip was strong. "Let's go home, Dad," she said. Not yet, I said, pulling out my phone. I have one more call to make. I need to make sure the lights are out at the Pinnacle when he tries to go home. Patrick Sterling did not walk away from his restaurant with dignity. He ran. He ran through the freezing Chicago streets, the wind tearing at his tuxedo jacket, his patent leather shoes slipping on patches of black ice. Monica stumbled beside him, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the pavement, her silver dress offering no protection against the biting cold. They looked like refugees from a high society shipwreck, shivering and desperate, fleeing the scene of their own destruction. I followed them in the town car, keeping a slow, predatory pace half a block behind. I watched them argue. I saw Monica shove Patrick. I saw Patrick scream something into the wind, his hands flailing at the uncaring sky. They were heading for the only sanctuary they thought they had left. The Pinnacle, the penthouse, the fortress in the sky, where Patrick played the role of the master of the universe. He thought he could go home, lock the door, pour a drink, and call a lawyer. He thought the walls of apartment 409 would protect him. He didn't realize that those walls were mine. They reached the revolving doors of the lobby, gasping for breath, their faces red from the exertion and the shame. Patrick practically threw himself at the entrance, eager to get out of the cold, eager to get away from the memory of the red shirts and the laughter. I parked the car at the curb and lowered the window just enough to hear. I didn't get out. I wanted to watch this from the stalls. This was the final act, and I had the best seat in the house. Patrick marched up to the inner security door, the heavy glass barrier that separated the residents from the rabble. He pulled his key fob from his pocket with a shaking hand. He slapped it against the sensor. Usually there would be a soft, welcoming beep and the green light of acceptance. Tonight there was a harsh, dissonant buzz. A red light flashed once, unforgiving and final. Patrick stared at the reader. He tried again. He rubbed the fob on his jacket, thinking it was a smudge, a technical glitch. He slapped it against the plastic again. Buzz red light access denied. It's broken. He yelled, his voice muffled by the glass. He pounded on the door with his fist. Open up, it's me. It's Mr. Sterling, the concierge. A young man named Elias, who had worked the night shift for 3 years, looked up from his desk. He saw Patrick. He saw the tuxedo. He saw the desperation. And then he looked down at his monitor, typed a single key, and went back to reading his magazine. He didn't move. He didn't buzz them in. Open the door. Monica shrieked, her voice cracking. I'm freezing. Do you know who we are? I watched Patrick kick the glass. He was unraveling. The facade of the cool, collected businessman was gone, replaced by a frightened child who had been locked out in the dark. Then the service door to the side of the lobby opened. It wasn't Elias who walked out. It was Mr. Cobb, the building manager. Cobb was a man cut from granite, an ex-Marine who ran the Pinnacle with the precision of a battleship. He held a clipboard in one hand and a large cardboard box in the other. 2 uniformed police officers stood behind him, their faces impassive. Cobb walked up to the glass door. He didn't open it. He spoke through the intercom system, his voice amplified, booming out onto the cold street, where Patrick and Monica stood shivering. Mr. Sterling Cobb said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Please step away from the door. You're causing a disturbance. Let me in, Cobb, Patrick shouted. My key isn't working. Fix it. Your key has been deactivated, sir, Cobb replied calmly. As of 5:00 p.m. this evening, your lease for Unit 409 has been terminated with immediate effect. Terminated? Patrick laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. You can't terminate a lease in the middle of the night. I have rights. I paid the rent. Actually, you didn't. Cobb corrected him, looking down at his clipboard. The check for this month came back insufficient funds yesterday, but that is the least of your problems. Your lease was voided under Clause 14, Section B, illegal use of premises. What illegal use? Patrick screamed. I live there. You used the address to register a business entity Velvet LLC, which is currently under investigation for fraud and grand larceny, Cobb recited. Under the terms of the building bylaws, any tenant engaged in felony criminal activity forfeits their residency rights immediately. We have a zero-tolerance policy for criminals, Mr. Sterling. Monica pushed Patrick aside and pressed her face against the glass. I don't care about his business, she yelled. My things are up there. My clothes, my jewelry, my bags. Let me up to get my things. Cobb looked at her with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. He bent down and picked up the cardboard box he had brought with him. He pushed it through the revolving door. It slid across the floor and bumped against Monica's shins. We packed your personal essentials, Cobb said. Toth brushes, chargers, a change of clothes. My bags, Monica screamed, kicking the box. I want my Birkins. I want my Louis Vuitton. Those are worth thousands. You can't keep them. That's theft. Cobb paused. He looked at the police officers, then back at Monica. Ms. Davis, he said slowly. We conducted an inventory of the apartment with a certified appraiser to ensure no assets were damaged during the packing process. We wanted to be careful with high-value items. And Monica demanded there were no high-value items. Cobb said. Monica froze. What are you talking about? My closet is full of designer bags. Patrick bought them for me. He spent $50,000 on my collection. Cobb shook his head. He pulled a sheet of paper from his clipboard and held it up against the glass. According to the appraiser, every single handbag in the apartment is a replica. Cobb said vinyl, pleather, high-quality stitching, perhaps, but knockoffs. They were manufactured in a sweatshop in Guangdong. The total value of the collection is estimated at less than $400. The silence that fell on the sidewalk was heavier than the snow. Monica turned slowly to look at Patrick. Her eyes were wide, her mouth agape. The cold wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't seem to feel it. Replicas, she whispered. Patrick wouldn't look at her. He stared at his shoes, his shoulders hunched. You told me they were real, Monica hissed. Her voice rose to a shriek. You told me you were rich. You told me you bought them in Paris. I had cash flow issues, Patrick stammered, backing away from her. I was going to replace them once the restaurant took off. I was going to buy you the real ones, you cheap lying bastard, Monica screamed. She lunged at him. Her fingernails rat across his face, leaving bright red streaks. You made me leave my husband for you. You told me you had millions. I gave up everything because you said you would take care of me. Patrick tried to fend her off, but he was weak. Defeated. She hit him with her clutch purse over and over, screaming obscenities that echoed off the glass tower. The police officers stepped forward, opening the door to separate them, but they didn't arrest her. They just pulled her back, letting her rage burn itself out in the cold air. Monica stood panting, her chest heaving. She looked at the cardboard box at her feet. She looked at the locked door. She looked at the man she had thought was her golden ticket, now revealed to be nothing but a fraud in a rented tuxedo. I'm done, she spat. I'm done with you. I'm done with your fake life. She turned and started walking down the street, hugging her arms around herself, leaving Patrick alone on the sidewalk. Patrick stood there bleeding from the scratch on his cheek. He looked at Cobb. He looked at the police. He looked at the building that had been his symbol of success. Please, he whispered. It's cold. I have nowhere to go. Just let me in for the night. I'll leave in the morning. Cobb didn't answer. He just pointed a finger toward the Blacktown car parked at the curb. My car. I opened the door and stepped out. I was still wearing my tuxedo, but I'd put my heavy wool coat over it. I walked across the street, my steps slow and deliberate. I stopped in front of Patrick. He looked at me. He looked at the building. He looked at me again. The gears in his mind were grinding slow and rusty, but they were finally turning. You, he breathed. I nodded. I told you, Patrick, I said. I told you I handled my business. You did this, he whispered. You locked me out. I didn't lock you out, I said. I evicted you. There is a difference. One is a mistake, the other is a judgment. But Howie asked, tears streaming down his face. How do you have this power? You're a truck driver. You live in a cabin. I turned and looked up at the building. It rose 40 stories into the night sky, a monolith of steel and glass. 15 years ago, I said, my voice quiet. I needed a place to park some capital. My lawyer suggested real estate. I bought a distressed development project. I finished it. I named it the Pinnacle because I wanted it to be the best. I own it, Patrick. I own the concrete. I own the glass. I own the elevator you rode every day. I turned back to him. For 6 months, you have been paying rent to a shell company called BK Holdings. BK Bernard Kowalski. You have been living in my house. You have been sleeping under my roof. And you used the money you stole from my daughter to pay me for the privilege. Patrick fell to his knees. He didn't collapse. He sank as if his legs had simply dissolved. He knelt on the cold concrete looking up at me. I didn't know, he sobbed. I didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense, I said. It is just another form of failure. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the $50 bill he had thrown at me the day before. I smoothed it out. You dropped this, I said. I let the bill flutter down. It landed on his lap. Keep it, I said. You're going to need it. The homeless shelter charges $5 for a blanket. I turned my back on him. I walked past the police officers who nodded at me. I walked past Cobb, who held the door open. I walked into the lobby of my building. Mr. Kowalski Cobb said, "The penthouse is secure. We changed the locks." "Thank you, Mr. Cobb." I said, "Keep the heat on low. I don't want the pipes to freeze, but no one goes in there. Leave it empty. I want it to be a museum to his failure." I walked to the elevator. I didn't go up to the penthouse. I didn't need to see his empty life. I pressed the button for the garage. My driver was waiting. I had one more stop to make. Patrick was broken, but he wasn't buried yet. The police were here for the eviction, but the real authorities were waiting for my signal. The night was cold, but I felt a fire burning in my chest. It was the warmth of justice, and it was just getting started. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers cut through the freezing darkness, painting the snow on the sidewalk in violent, alternating strokes of color. Patrick was still on his knees, shivering, staring at the $50 bill resting on his thigh. He looked up, expecting the officers to be there to enforce the eviction, to tell him to move along, but these weren't beat cops. These were detectives in plain clothes wearing windbreakers, emblazed with the seal of the Financial Crimes Unit. A man stepped out of the lead unmarked sedan. I knew him. Detective Miller. We had spoken 3 hours ago when Leonard handed over the dossier of evidence. The forged deed, the fraudulent divorce decree, and the marriage license to Monica, dated 2 weeks after the fake divorce was finalized. Patrick squinted against the glare. "Officers," he croaked, trying to stand up, trying to summon a shred of his former arrogance. "Thank God. This man has locked me out of my home. He's stolen my property. I want to file a complaint." Detective Miller didn't blink. He walked up to Patrick, pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt, and spun Patrick around. Patrick Sterling Miller said, his voice flat and practiced, "You are under arrest." "Arrest?" Patrick yelped, as his face was pressed against the cold brick of the building. "For what?" "For forgetting my keys." "This is insane." "Do you know who I am? We know exactly who you are," Miller said, ratcheting the cuffs tight. "You are being charged with 3 counts of forgery in the first dairy wire fraud and bigamy." Patrick froze. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. Bigamy, he whispered. You are legally married to Bethany Kowalski Miller recited. Your divorce decree was obtained through fraud on the court. That makes your marriage to Monica Davis invalid and a felony offense. You also forged your wife's signature to sell a property at 124 Maple Street. We have the handwriting analysis. Monica, who had been huddled near the curb trying to call an Uber, dropped her phone. It clattered onto the ice. She looked at Patrick, then at the police terror widening her eyes. She started to back away, her heels scraping on the concrete. I didn't know she stammered. I didn't know anything. He told me he was divorced. I'm a victim. Ms. Davis, a female officer, said, stepping into her path. You're not going anywhere. I have nothing to do with this, Monica shrieked. You are wearing a platinum bracelet purchased with funds from the wire fraud account, the officer said calmly. You are in possession of stolen property, and according to witness statements from the notary. You were present when Mr. Sterling practiced forging his wife's signature. That makes you an accessory to fraud and conspiracy. He made me do it. Monica screamed, pointing a manicured finger at Patrick. He said he needed the money to start the business. He said the old woman was dead anyway. He promised me we would be rich. That's enough, the officer said, grabbing Monica's wrist and spinning her around. The click of the handcuffs was the only sound on the street for a moment. I watched from the steps of the building. It was a clean sweep. Leonard had been thorough. Patrick was hauled up from the wall. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, glassy with shock. He looked at the building he thought was his. He looked at the car he thought was his. And then he looked at me, the man he thought was a beggar. Kowalski, he muttered. He rolled the name around in his mouth, tasting the ash of his own ignorance. Bernard Kowalski. He blinked, a sudden spark of recognition cutting through his panic. He had heard the name before. Not as his father-in-law, not as the old man who fixed the sink. He had heard it in business school. He had heard it in the whispers of the trading floor where he tried to play with the big boys. The ghost, he whispered. I stepped closer, the cold wind tossing the hem of my coat. What did you say, Patrick? They talked about a CFO? Patrick said, his voice trembling. In logistics, a guy who never made the news but took down 3 Fortune 500 CEOs for embezzlement in the 9s. They called him the ghost because by the time you saw him on the ledger, you were already liquidated. He stared at me with a new kind of horror. It wasn't just the fear of prison. It was the realization of who he had tried to rob. He had tried to steal a wallet from the man who wrote the book on theft recovery. You, Patrick choked, you were the one who broke Redline Freight. I broke them because they were thieves, Patrick, I said softly. Just like you. The detective began to guide him toward the squad car. Patrick stumbled, his legs useless. Wait, I said. The detective paused. I walked up to Patrick. He flinched, expecting a blow. I didn't hit him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $50 bill. The same bill he had thrown at me yesterday. The same bill I had dropped on his lap 5 minutes ago. It had fallen to the ground when they stood him up. I picked it up. I brushed a speck of snow off Grant's face. I reached out and tucked the bill into the breast pocket of Patrick's tuxedo jacket. I patted it gently. Keep it, I said. You're going to need it. Patrick stared at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood from his scratch. Why, he wept. Because there are no ATMs in prison, son, I said. And commissary isn't free. I stepped back. The detective pushed Patrick's head down and shoved him into the back of the cruiser. Monica was shoved into the second car, still screaming about her innocence. The doors slammed shut. The finality of the sound echoed off the glass walls of the Pinnacle. I watched through the window as Patrick slumped against the seat. He looked out at me. Our eyes met one last time. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked small. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream to find himself in a coffin. The cruisers pulled away, lights flashing, sirens chirping once as they merged into the traffic. They disappeared around the corner, taking the noise and the drama with them. Silence returned to the street. The snow began to fall again. Soft white flakes covering the footprints, covering the spot where Patrick had knelt, covering the stain of his greed. I turned to the building. Cobb was standing inside the glass doors watching. He nodded to me. I nodded back. I walked to my town car. The driver held the door open. I slid into the warmth of the back seat. Bethany was waiting for me at the cabin. She was safe. The house was gone. But the home was wherever we were together. Where to, Mr. Kowalski? The driver asked. Home, I said. Take me to the woods. I leaned my head back against the leather seat and closed my eyes. It was over. The debt was paid. The books were balanced, and the ghost could finally fade back into the shadows. The gavel came down 3 weeks later in civil court with a sound like a rifle shot. The judge, an older woman with eyes like flint, who clearly didn't appreciate forgery in her courtroom, declared the sale of the Oak Park house void ab initio from the beginning. The deed was returned to Bethany. The previous buyers, a nice young couple, who had been duped by Patrick just as thoroughly as my daughter, were made whole by the title insurance company, who immediately filed their own lawsuit against Patrick. He was getting hit from all sides, bleeding out in a courtroom shark tank. We stood on the front lawn of the house on a Tuesday morning. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and thawing snow. The house looked exactly the same beige siding, the same black shutters, the same oak tree dropping dead leaves onto the porch. It was officially Bethy's again. The key was in her hand. It was the same brass key she had given me a copy of 10 years ago, back when she thought her life was just starting, back when she thought Patrick was her prince. Now the metal felt heavy in her palm, cold and dense like a piece of lead. She walked up the steps. I stayed on the sidewalk, leaning against the hood of my truck. This was a threshold she needed to cross alone. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. The hinges groaned a sound of neglect. The air inside rushed out to meet her stale and still smelling of dust and the faint, lingering, clawing scent of Patrick's expensive cologne. The furniture was gone. The previous buyers had moved out in a hurry when the legal notices started pasting the front door. It was just an empty shell of drywall and timber, echoing with the ghosts of a marriage that had been a lie. I watched her walk through the living room. Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors I had helped refinish 5 years ago. She traced her hand along the wall where their wedding photos used to hang, where she had smiled in white lace next to the man who would later leave her to freeze. She stood in the kitchen, where he had told her he loved her while he was siphoning money from their joint accounts. She went up the stairs to the bedroom where he had packed her bags, while she was crying in a motel room waiting for a call that never came. 10 minutes later, she walked back out. She didn't look sad. She didn't look broken. She looked tired, but it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you finish a long, hard job, like digging a ditch or burying a body. She locked the door with a firm, decisive click. She walked down the steps and handed me the key. "Sell it," she said. I looked at her, weighing the key in my hand. "Are you sure it's a good neighborhood? Property values are up. It represents a lot of equity. You could live here. You could rent it out. It's not a home, Dad." She replied, her voice steady. "It's a crime scene. It's a mausoleum. I can't live with ghosts. Sell it. Burn it. I don't care. Just get rid of it. I never want to see this address on a piece of mail ever again." I nodded. I understood. You don't keep the knife that stabbed you. You melt it down. Melt it. I called my broker that afternoon. We listed it below the market value for a cash-only quick sale. We didn't want a bidding war. We wanted an exorcism. It was gone in 48 hours. The check for $850,000 sat on my kitchen table at the cabin 3 days later. It was a lot of money. It was enough to start over anywhere. It was enough to buy a condo, a new car, a trip around the world. Bethany sat looking at the check for a long time. She drank her coffee, the steam rising in the quiet kitchen. She watched the birds fighting for seeds at the feeder outside the window. "I don't want it," she said finally. I frowned, putting down my newspaper. "It's your money, Bethany. It's your equity. You earned it. You survived for it. It's your restitution." "It feels dirty," she said, pushing the slip of paper away with one finger. "It feels like blood money. Every dollar of this reminds me of how stupid I was, how blind I was. If I spend this on myself, I'll feel like I'm profiting from my own trauma." "You weren't stupid," I said firmly. "You were betrayed. There is a difference. You trusted a con man. That's on him, not you." She looked at me, her blue eyes sharp and clear. "Dad, do you know how many women I saw in the shelter those first few nights? How many women were sleeping under that bridge with me? They didn't have a father like you. They didn't have a Bernard Kowalski to swoop in with a checkbook and a team of lawyers and a knowledge of forensic accounting. They just disappeared. They lost their homes, their kids, their dignity, just because they trusted the wrong man or signed the wrong paper. They didn't have a safety net." She picked up the check. Her hand was steady. "I want to open a trust," she said. "A trust?" I asked. "A legal defense fund," she corrected. "I want to hire Leonard. I want to pay him his full rate to help women who are victims of economic abuse. I want to help them fight back. I want to help them find the hidden accounts, the forged deeds, the stolen futures. And I want to provide the forensic accountants, the private investigators, the pit bull lawyers that they can't afford. I want to be the cavalry for the women who have no one coming for them." I looked at my daughter. For years, I had seen her as delicate. I had seen her as the little girl who needed a red scarf to stay warm, who needed me to check under the bed for monsters. I had protected her. I had shielded her. I had fought her battles because I thought she couldn't. But looking at her now with the fire in her eyes and the set of her jaw, I realized I had been wrong. She wasn't delicate. She was tempered steel. The fire Patrick had put her through hadn't burned her to ash. It had forged her. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a warrior. "That is a hell of a business plan," I said softly. We went to see Leonard the next day. When Bethany explained what she wanted to do, Leonard didn't talk about billable hours or retainers. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. He drafted the articles of incorporation for the Phoenix Foundation right there on the spot. He waived his fees. He said it would be an honor to serve on the board. The next few months were a blur of activity. Bethany wasn't crying in her room anymore. She was working. She was renting office space, modest, functional space in the Loop, not a glass tower. She was interviewing forensic accountants. She was meeting with social workers. She was building a network of sharks who wanted to hunt for a good cause. I watched her run a meeting one afternoon. She was dissecting a case file of a woman whose husband had hidden assets in cryptocurrency before filing for divorce. Bethany spotted the discrepancy in the withdrawal patterns in 5 minutes. She looked up at the team, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Subpoena the exchange records," she ordered. "He's moving the money on Tuesdays. He thinks we aren't looking. Nail him? Freeze his assets?" I stood in the doorway leaning on my cane. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was pride, yes, massive and overwhelming, but it was also relief. A deep, settling relief. I had spent my life building BK Holdings. I had amassed properties, stocks, bonds, and power. I had done it all to be safe, to be the man who couldn't be hurt. But I was 72 years old. My knees hurt when it rained. My eyes were getting tired. I couldn't be the ghost forever. I couldn't be the watchdog for eternity. I walked into the conference room after the meeting broke up. Bethany was organizing her files looking efficient and formidable in a blazer and jeans. "Dad," she said, smiling, "did you see that we're going to get that woman her pension back?" "We found the offshore accounts, I saw." I said, "You're good at this. You have the nose. You have the instinct." "I learned from the best," she said. I sat down at the table. I placed a heavy leather binder in front of her. It wasn't the checkbook. It was the master ledger for BK Holdings. It contained the access codes, the property deeds, the shell company structures, the offshore routing numbers. It was the keys to the kingdom. It was the map to the empire I had built in the shadows. "What is this?" she asked, touching the leather cover. "I'm retiring Bethany," I said, for real this time. She looked at the binder, then at me. "Dad, you're already retired. You grow tomatoes. You fix the porch." "I was hiding," I said. "I was waiting for a fight. I was keeping the powder dry in case I needed to go to war." "Well, the war is over. Patrick is in a cell awaiting trial. The house is sold. You are safe. You are strong." I pushed the binder toward her. "I don't want to run it anymore. I don't want to track the markets. I don't want to hunt the wolves. I'm tired. I want to sit on my porch. I want to fix my steps. I want to read books that have nothing to do with tax law. I want to be an old man." "But Dad," she said, her eyes wide, this is everything. This is the empire. This is millions of dollars. It needs a CEO. I said it needs someone who knows what it feels like to lose everything so they know exactly how hard to fight to keep it. It needs someone who understands that money isn't just numbers. It's ammunition. It's a shield. I stood up. My back popped. "You are the chairman now, Bethany. I already filed the paperwork with the state. Leonard has the signature cards ready for you at the bank. The assets are yours. The power is yours. Use it to burn the bad guys down." She stood up and walked around the table. She hugged me. It wasn't the desperate cling of the woman under the bridge. It was the embrace of an equal, a partner. "I won't let you down," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Patrick Sterling made a lot of mistakes, but his biggest mistake wasn't stealing from me. It was underestimating you." I walked out of the office. I walked out to my truck. I drove back to the cabin. The sun was shining on the snow. It was a bright, clear day. I got home and changed my clothes. I took off the city clothes. I put on my old overalls and my work boots. I went out to the shed and got my tools. The porch steps really were rotting. I knelt down in the snow, the cold seeping into my knees. And I smiled. I picked up a hammer. I pulled out a nail. It was good, honest work. I was just an old man now. I was just a gardener. I was just a father who fixed things. And for the first time in 40 years, the ghost was finally truly gone. I didn't need him anymore. My daughter had taken his place, and God help anyone who tried to cross her. I swung the hammer. The sound echoed through the quiet woods. It sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like peace. The seasons have changed. The snow that once covered the tracks of my enemies has melted, feeding the earth, turning the gray woods into a vibrant, living green. I sit on my porch in a rocking chair that cacks with a familiar, comforting rhythm. The air smells of pine needles and damp soil, not the sterile, recycled air of a boardroom or the metallic tang of a holding cell. I hold a mug of coffee in my hands. It is cheap coffee brewed strong and black just the way I like it. I don't need the $12 lattes Patrick used to buy to feel important. I feel important because the sun is on my face and my conscience is clean. I look out at the driveway. My Ford F-150 is parked there. It still has the same rust spot on the fender. It still rattles when I turn the key, but to me it looks like a chariot. It is the vehicle that carried my daughter from the depths of hell back to the land of the living. It is the vessel that carried me into the heart of the enemy's fortress and brought me back out unscathed. Patrick hated that truck. He said it was an eyesore. He said it lowered the property value of his existence. Now Patrick looks at concrete walls and steel bars. He looks at a schedule dictated by guards. He doesn't have to worry about property values anymore. He has to worry about survival. I don't think about him often. At first I did. I thought about him sitting in his cell during the trial, watching his arrogance get stripped away layer by layer, until there was nothing left but a scared little boy who made bad choices. I thought about the moment the judge read the sentence, 15 years. I thought about the look on his face when he realized that no amount of charm or lies could unlock a prison door, but now he is just a ghost. He is a footnote in a ledger I closed long ago. He is a bad debt that has been written off. I don't hate him. Hate takes energy. Hate requires you to keep a connection to the person you despise. I have no connection to him. I have indifference. And indifference is the truest form of freedom. The screen door opens behind me. Bethany walks out. She isn't wearing the red dress or the diamonds today. She is wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She looks younger. She looks like the girl who used to run through these woods catching fireflies. But there is a steel in her spine that wasn't there before. She holds a tablet in her hand, reviewing a quarterly report for the foundation. She runs an empire now. She moves millions of dollars with a phone call. She strikes fear into the hearts of predatory lenders and abusive husbands across the state. But here on this porch, she is just my daughter. She sits on the railing, putting the tablet down. She looks at me and smiles. It is a real smile. It reaches her eyes. The shadows that haunted her face in the hospital room are gone, burned away by the light of her own reclamation. "Ready to go, Dad?" she asks. I nod. I drain my coffee and set the mug on the floor. I stand up, my knees popping. I am 72 years old. I am an old man, but I don't feel old today. I feel timeless. We walk to the truck. I open the passenger door for her Hutu. Not because she is weak, but because she is precious. She climbs in, tossing her tablet onto the dashboard. She doesn't care about the torn upholstery. She loves this truck as much as I do. I climb into the driver's seat, I turn the key. The engine roars to life, a rough, throaty sound that echoes off the trees. I shift into gear and we crunch down the gravel driveway, leaving the cabin behind. We're heading into town for lunch. We're going to a diner where the waitress knows my name and the pie is homemade. We aren't going to the Pinnacle. We aren't going to a place with velvet ropes. We're going to a place where people look you in the eye and tell you the truth. As we hit the main road, I roll down the window. The wind rushes in, warm and smelling of summer. Bethany turns on the radio. It's an old classic rock station. She starts singing along, tapping her hand on the door frame. I join in, my voice growly and off-key. We laugh. The sound of our laughter fills the cab, louder than the engine, louder than the wind. I look in the rearview mirror. The city skyline is a distant gray smudge on the horizon. The glass towers where men like Patrick play their games, where they measure their worth in square footage and stock options, are fading away. I spent 40 years in that city. I conquered it, I owned it, and then I walked away from it because I found something better. I look at my daughter, she is laughing at a joke the DJ made. She is alive, she is safe, she is free. People ask me if I enjoyed destroying Patrick Sterling. They ask if revenge is sweet. They want to know if it felt good to watch his life burn down. I tell them the truth. The destruction was necessary. It was a demolition job. You have to tear down the rotting structure before you can build something new. But the destruction wasn't the point. The revenge wasn't the prize. The prize is this moment. The prize is driving down a country road in a rusted truck with my daughter sitting next to me whole and happy. The prize is knowing that I protected what was mine. Patrick wanted to be rich. He thought wealth was a number in a bank account. He thought it was a penthouse view and a leased car. He didn't understand that true wealth is the ability to walk away. True wealth is the ability to lose everything material and still know exactly who you are. I am Bernard Kowalski. I am a gardener. I am a truck driver. I am a father. I reach over and pat Bethy's hand. She squeezes mine back. The road stretches out in front of us, long and open. We leave the shadows behind. We leave the greed behind. We leave the ghosts in their cages. The best revenge isn't seeing your enemy suffer. They will suffer regardless because they carry their own prisons inside them. The best revenge is living a life so full, so authentic, and so joyful that their existence no longer matters. I press down on the gas. The old truck surges forward. We are going to get pie. We are going to talk about the garden. We are going to live. And Patrick Sterling. He will never forget me. He will tell stories about the ghost who stole his life. He will rot in his cell, consumed by the math of his failure. But me, I have already forgotten him. I have better things to do. I have a daughter to love. And I have a life to live one beautiful, honest day at a time. I have learned that the heaviest thing a man can carry is not a sack of cement or a burden of debt, but the crushing weight of a lie. Patrick lived a lie building a castle on sand and it buried him. I lived a quiet truth and it liberated me. True wealth is not found in a penthouse view or a luxury car. It is found in the ability to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. It is found in the courage to stand up when everyone else expects you to kneel. Never let anyone define your worth by your wallet. Your worth is defined by what you are willing to defend. If you believe in this kind of justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments if you would have forgiven Patrick or if he got exactly what he deserved.